Good morning, boys and girls. It's Mr. Polson and Baby Susan back with you. As you can see, Baby Susan is wrapped up in a blanket today because it's so cold outside. We had all that snow this weekend on Easter Sunday, so I hope you're able to get out and enjoy the snow, even though it's kind of strange this time of year. But it's chilly outside. It's only 18 degrees this morning, so Baby Susan is wrapped up in a blanket. What we're going to do first today, brothers and sisters, we're going to take a little break from the chapter book, Little House on the Prairie, and we are going to read one of my first Little House books today. It's called Little Prairie House, and this is basically, remember when we read Little House in the Big Woods? Lots of chapters in the big chapter books were made into picture books. So I'm going to read this to you because it's got some really good pictures of how Pa built the Little House on the Prairie. And I'm going to put Susan over here to let her sleep and stay warm because I want to make sure you can see the pictures in this little book I have here. I got this from Mrs. C. Okay, let's get this ready here so you can see get the glare off there. Okay, it's called A Little Prairie House. And here's Laura, and here's their house. Remember what Laura called it? A skeleton roof before Pa put the canvas roof on it? Here's a really neat picture of the wagon going across the prairie. It gives you a nice picture of what the prairie in Kansas looks like. And here's Jack behind the wagon. Once upon a time, a little girl named Laura traveled in a covered wagon across the giant prairie. She traveled with her Pa, her Ma, her big sister Mary, her little sister Carrie, and their good old bulldog Jack. They were searching for the perfect place to build themselves a little house. So here's a picture of Jack, and here is Pa and Ma. This is Powderhorn, and here's Mary and Laura and baby Carrie, and here are their new dolls, Charlotte and Nettie. Don't get jealous, Baby Susan. One day, the little family had been traveling across the prairie for a long time. Laura and Mary woke up earlier than the sun. They ate their breakfast of cornmeal mush and hurried to help Ma wash the dishes. Pa was loading everything into the wagon. Here's a picture of Pa loading up, and Mary and Laura helping to do the dishes. When the sun rose, they were driving across the prairie. There was no road to drive on, so Pet and Patty, the two gentle mustangs, waded through the grasses. There's Pet and Patty. Later that morning, Pa said, "Whoa!" The wagon stopped. "Here we are," he said. "Right here we'll build our house." Laura and Mary jumped to the ground. All around them there was nothing but prairie. Over here is the wagon, and there's the family after they jumped out of the wagon. And this is the spot where Pa decided they were going to build their house on the prairie. Right away, Pa and Ma began to unload the wagon. They took everything out and piled it on the ground, while Laura and Mary and Jack watched. Then Pa drove the wagon down into the prairie out of sight to get a load of logs from the creek bottom. And here's where egg dolls are again. You better not show Susan. She might get upset. Laura was frightened to be left on the prairie without the wagon. She wanted to hide in the tall grass like a little prairie chicken, but instead she helped Ma while Mary sat on the grass and minded baby Carrie. That means she watched baby Carrie. Soon, Pa came back with a load of logs. For days and days, Pa kept hauling logs. He made 2 piles of them, one for the house and one for the stable. When he had enough logs, it was time to build. Pa began the house first. I'm going to show you this picture here. Here's a picture of Pa with these logs that he got. Can you imagine cutting those down by yourself and loading them into that wagon? Remember in the in the chapter book it said it was this Pa took the wagon box off and all it was left is the wheels and the parts that held everything together. She called it a skeleton. So here's the skeleton of the wagon. And you can kind of see Pa's wagon tracks going away here and coming back. Remember, there were no roads. And here's the 2 piles of logs, one for the house and one for the stable. All by himself, Pa built the walls of the house, 3 logs high, and then Ma helped him. Log by log, Pa and Ma built the walls higher and higher. Soon Laura couldn't climb over them anymore. So here's Ma, here's Pa, lifting the logs onto the house, and here is Laura trying to climb over it. See, the house now is 1, 2, 3 logs high. And there's Pet and Patty over there watching what's going on. Sorry about the glare. Then one day, Pa was off hunting, and he came home whistling merrily. Good news, he shouted. Pa had met a neighbor on the other side of the creek. His name was Mr. Edwards, and he was going to help Pa finish building the house. Then Pa would help Mr. Edwards build his house. Oh, are we going to get to see Mr. Edwards, do you think? I sure hope so. Early next morning, Mr. Edwards came. He was lean and tall, and bowed to Ma politely. He told Laura he was a wildcat from Tennessee, and he could spit farther than Laura had ever imagined anyone could spit. Laura tried and tried, but she could never spit so far or so well as Mr. Edwards could. Here's Mr. Edwards, the wildcat from Tennessee, bowing to Ma politely. Look at Carrie, doesn't know what to think. She's pulling on Ma's dress. And there's Pa sniffing. Or not Pa, but Jack. Mr. Edwards was a fast worker. One day he and Pa built the walls of the little house as high as Pa wanted them. They sang while they worked, and their axes made the chips fly. They cut a tall hole for the door and square holes for the window. And here's a picture. Remember we talked about, I went into detail in the chapter book about how they made notches like Lincoln logs to hold the house together. And here's Pa and Mr. Edwards making the notches. And there's their ladle that they use to scoop water out of when they get thirsty. Laura couldn't wait to see the inside of the house, and as soon as the tall hole was cut, she ran inside. Stripes of sunshine came through the cracks in the wall and went across Laura's hands and arms and feet. You can see remember we talked about in the chapter book of how no log was perfectly straight or even, so there's all these holes, and they'd have to chink those holes. But Laura thought it was pretty cool to have all that sunlight coming through and shining on her. At the end of the day, Mr. Edwards said he would go home, but Pa and Ma said he must stay to supper. Ma had made stewed jackrabbit and steaming hot, thick cornbread with molasses. Mr. Edwards said he surely did appreciate that supper. Then Pa took out his fiddle and began to sing. So here they all are, eating their supper on the prairie. Suddenly Mr. Edwards jumped up and began to dance. He danced like a jumping jack in the moonlight, while Pa's fiddle kept on rollicking, and Laura's and Mary's hands were clapping together. Pa played and played, and Mr. Edwards danced and danced. And there they all are dancing in front. There's Mr. Edwards dancing in front of their new house, the Ingalls' new house that he helped build. Finally, Mr. Edwards said he must go. "Play me down the road," he said. So Pa played, and Pa and Laura and Mr. Edwards sang with all their might, until Laura could not hear Mr. Edwards any more. Only the wind rustled in the prairie grasses, and the big yellow moon sailed over the new little house on the prairie. Remember the song they sang? Old Dan Tucker was a fine old man, washed his face in a frying pan, combed his hair with a wagon wheel, died of a toothache in his heel. So get out of the way for old Dan Tucker, get out of the way for old Dan Tucker, get out of the way for old Dan Tucker. He's too late to get his supper. Supper's done and the dishes washed. All that's left is a piece of squash. And that's the end of our picture book, A Little Prairie House. And we will read chapter 7 of Little House on the Prairie later today. Have a good day, everybody.